Botswana Pension Society recently held its flagship BPS annual conference. The BPS annual conference has been running consistently since 2006, and those attending the conference are treated to a wide variety of information and strategies on the tools necessary for the effective management of an occupational scheme or a personal retirement portfolio.
Now, with the theme regulatory framework and its impact on retirement funds, today we get to join Botswana Pension Society for the 2023 conference.
The theme for this year's conference was regulatory framework and its impact on retirement funds. The theme sought to open up discussions and debate in view of the current regulatory framework changes recently introduced through the Retirement Funds Act of 2022.
I'm very pleased to welcome all conference delegates to the 2023 annual conference of the Botswana Pension Society. The conference is our first physical conference after COVID-19 crisis, which compelled us to hold two consecutive virtual conferences during the 2022 and the 2021 years. It is indeed a cause for joy. It is indeed a cause for joy to once again be able to converge physically, and at the end of the conference day, to top up with an activity which allows us to network, which is a networking dinner.
The conference, as has been said, is themed Regulatory Framework and its Impact on Retirement Funds. Indeed, an appropriate theme. Taking cognizance of the fact that there were new regulations that came into effect in October 2022. We believe that pension funds play a critical role in society. Pension funds ensure that there are domestic savings, ensure that our pensioners retire in a very dignified manner. They provide a social security to the country in which they are. So this is a very important, extremely important event where a lot of pension fund trustees are here and are able to engage. They're able to share. They're able to talk to one another about what they are seeing in their different pension funds and how we can all tackle the challenges that are coming along.
This year's guest speakers were from the Retirement Funds Institute of Namibia. The speakers shared more about the Retirement Funds Institute of Namibia and the Namibian Retirement Fund industry reform.
The purpose of ARFIN is to reach the man on the floor and to be able to speak to the government, the regulator, the asset managers, and all the stakeholders. We have a value proposition for each one of our stakeholders, and we must be able to test if we are delivering that value. Annual conferences are wonderful, and I must say, I enjoy talking to my counterparts. But I always reflect and say, have we been the voice of industry? Throughout the 365 days of the year, has the industry been hearing from us? Have you been hearing from us? Have we been engaging? Were you able to call and get an answer on the other side? That is our core value proposition.
The new legislation that is in a financial institution, that is the Financial Institutions and Markets Act. So what that piece of legislation does, and it was passed in September 2021, it was a breakthrough for the industry because we've been waiting for this legislation for more than 14 years. It was being drafted since 2009, I think. So with that legislation, firstly, it combines all the pieces of legislation that, most of the pieces of legislation that NAMFISA actually regulate. So you have in that act, you have your insurance industry that is being regulated, you have your pension fund, you have your medical aid funds, you have your stock exchanges control act, and then you have your capital markets act that is also combined in this. And then within this legislation, what it does for us is that the minister issues regulations, NAMFISA issues standards, and then they also issue directives and guidelines. So it's quite a huge piece of legislation. And then we have a chapter that tries to combine all industries, and it's called the general chapter. The problem that comes with combining all these pieces of legislation is that you are going to be faced with unintended consequences. You cannot regulate or supervise a pension fund as you would an insurance company.
Other issues that were also unpacked touched on some of the key developments in the retirement funds regulatory framework and their importance.
Where we are now, we are in the Retirement Fund Act of 2022. So this is where I'm going to share with you the changes. So the first key change that I want to share is the one that talks to the enhanced regulation of fund administration. It is found in section 25. This is not to say that before they were not regulated. Just to mention that we didn't have a strong and a significant or specific regulation for fund administration. So this has been an improvement in regulation. For example, we didn't have the supervisory powers to take over the control of the distressed entity, what we call statutory management. And there is increase in reporting requirements and also some provisions that talk to AML CFT requirements.
Regulation remains important in that it plays a crucial role in shaping the behavior of market participants and also can be a tool for creating and maintaining financial stability. One of the critical issues that were discussed in the conference is that of adequate regulatory framework and why it is necessary.
For an environment to be deemed to be effective, a regulatory environment to be deemed to be effective, it needs to lay out rules and regulations that are clear and aren't open to ambiguity. If I sit here and reading a specific portion of regulation, I should be able to interpret it more or less in the same way that the next person would be, so that when we are trying to comply with that regulation, we sort of end up at the same, with the same sort of conclusion. And regulation also fosters a healthy competition between the market players. It also looks to ensure that the market players are not only serving their needs, they are actually, product innovation is relevant. I think this will be quite key in the previous speaker spoke about the regulations that are coming. I think we're all aware of that, particularly with the onshore-offshore split. And with that, obviously, the industry needs to sit and say, look, this is the situation we're in. What can we do to ensure that when these funds come, ultimately the pensioners, upon retirement, will be able to enjoy the returns of their funds instead of just sitting and complaining that there's no way we can invest the money, there's no way we can invest the money, and 10 years later, when somebody, 10, 20 years later, when somebody retires, they're told the same thing, that there's no way we could invest your money.
Adequate regulatory framework recognizes the benefits of a stable regulatory environment. We will all agree that a stable regulatory framework produces long-term results. And so for us, really, if a regulatory framework is adequate enough, then there should be that orderliness in the market, and then that would translate into stability. It also recognizes that statutory regulation is not always the option. At times, you don't need to necessarily go by way of statutory regulation. You then need to allow industry players to self-regulate. And so a mix between the two would actually then lead to some sort of adequacy. As earlier on, I spoke about the different regulatory models, and I spoke about co-regulation, which encompasses statutory regulation, contractual regulation, self-regulation. And so if a regulatory framework recognizes that statutory regulation is not the only option, then adequacy can actually be achieved by embedding other regulatory models in there.
Later on the day, there were two panel discussions. The first panel discussion was on the topic, is it financially beneficial to members to access retirement savings earlier than retirement age, and how it is going to affect them later when they retire?
The recent legislative changes require that we take a step back and really reflect upon the effectiveness of the pension system. What lessons have we drawn perhaps from the experiences of the past 20 years, how effective is our pension system in really delivering the retirement outcomes that our members expect of us?
We are going to get to a point of having very little retirement savings, giving us very low annuities, and ultimately even getting that amount as a lump sum. And the burden goes back to the government, for the government to support us every single month because we are no longer able to work. So that's the no part of whether it's prudent to access your retirement savings before your retirement age.
The second panel discussion touched on the Retirement Funds Act of 2022, its impact and opportunities.
The proposed repatriation of funds, given the amount of liquidity that is going to bring back into the local economy, is most likely going to benefit the finance, insurance, and pension sector, as observed by the statistics of Botswana, how they have divided up sectors of the economy.
What's going to happen when we have the inflow of these pension funds back to the country? We have had situations in the past that we can take as experience to guide us in how things might evolve. We have had a liquidity squeeze in 2017, and that resulted in the Bank of Botswana cutting down the monetary policy rate not monetary policy rate, but they did cut that, but the required reserve ratio is what I want to talk about. They cut it from 10% to 5%. We had another squeeze in the banking system in 2020, and they cut it further down from that 5% to 2.5%.
Many organizations in the pension industry had set up stalls to offer any information that one would need. The stalls provided unraveled exposure to decision makers such as trustees of retirement funds and local as well as regional regulators.
Only together as an industry, that is everybody who is here, who is contributing, who is part of the ecosystem of, pensions, is important, and we just need to hold each other's hand in order to advocate for an improvement of the industry. When I say improvement, I'm talking also about inclusivity. The majority of people are now going into self-employment. Are there any products that are relevant for the self-employed? There are the AVCs, but are they enough? Is there something else that we could do? There are the SMMEs, our young people, because of the unemployment, the high unemployment rate, they are venturing into hustler. But can they actually also be part of the long-term investments to take care of them at the end of during the retirement period?
The conference ended with a gala dinner that was sponsored by Rand Merchant Bank.
We do see that the proposed legislation says that there should be an appointment of the anti-money laundering officer and the counter-terrorism finance officer. And this speaks much to heightened governance that we want to see in our funds. As well as from an ESG perspective, we see that in the proposed regulations, ESG will become very topical. There are various projects around the country that where corporates have issued bonds that consist of a pipeline of assets that are ESG friendly, or green rather, or green. So our onshore and offshore asset is moving from 30% to 50% in terms of the minimum investment of domestic assets, and this really calls on to us as banks, as custodians, as fund managers to see how we'll be able to adequately adopt or invest these assets.